Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Lead Skill Show. I'm your host, Oscar, and with us today we have a very exciting guest. Her name is Morgaine Trine from Honestly Bookkeeping, and we talked last week a little bit about journey, future of the industry, AI, and those sort of subjects. So we'll dive a little bit into that in this episode. And for those that are new to our podcast, I like inviting leaders in the accounting, bookkeeping, financial services space, accounting as well, CPAs, so that they can share their entrepreneurial journey with us, and hopefully we can inspire people to start their own entrepreneurial journey as well. So first of all, thank you, Morgaine, for being here, accepting to be a guest on my podcast.
Absolutely. I'm really excited, and I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have today. I think it's going to be good.
Thank you. I think so too. And first question, can you tell the audience a little bit about your company, what you guys do and your role in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I own and founded Honestly Bookkeeping. We're a virtual bookkeeping firm that approaches things from an ecostemic perspective. So we're looking at who are all of the people and what's all of the technology that touches money in our clients' businesses. And then how do we create workflows and processes so that the flow of information and the flow of the finances happens in a very consistent and efficient and smooth manner. And so because we have that more systemic approach, we're looking at this from what's all of the parts of the whole, we find that owners that have multiple businesses tend to really love working with us. So a pretty big subset of our client base has multiple businesses. Maybe not all of them are doing their bookkeeping with us, but usually eventually all of the businesses end up working with us. So
that's great.
It's nice. So that's a little bit about Honestly Bookkeeping. And then, like I said, I founded it and to be virtual and remote first. And so when I'm not behind the computer, I'm typically either reading a book or traveling somewhere new, and usually both at the same time.
That's great. I love how a lot of the times, we travel and there's that big stereotype of people just bringing their books with them. I am actually one of them. And for that reason, when the Kindle first came out, I was one of the first people to get one because I didn't want to travel with 2, 3, 4, 5 books.
Exactly.
Definitely understand that. And okay. And so, well, first, before I go to the next question, ecostemic. You said that's the word that you use, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what ecostemic is and what it means?
Yeah. So, I think we'll get into the meat of this a little bit later.
Okay.
But the sort of quick, maybe not definition, but the quick explanation is, right, thinking about things as a system and something that isn't static, right?
Okay.
I mean, this is a whole other thing, but we think about in business, arriving at a destination. We think within finances of reaching this net profit margin or this revenue goal. And yet that doesn't really reflect the fact that businesses ebb and flow, right? And that the finances are going to ebb and flow, and that bookkeeping is an iterative process. It's a cyclical process, and that much more mirrors an ecosystem, repeatable, sustaining process, right? We're not doing a linear from point A to point B. It's point A to B to C to A in this flow.
Yeah.
And to if we think about currency as a current, right, there's a sense of flow in that. There's a sense of movement. And so I like to use the word ecostemic to get at that flow, to get at that non-static nature, and to get at a holistic view, right? At the root of good bookkeeping is an understanding of how what you're doing impacts and interacts with taxes, right? We're not doing this in a vacuum just because it's for funsies. I mean, I find it's fun, but
I'm glad you do. You're in the right business then.
Right, exactly. But from a basic perspective, you're doing bookkeeping to comply with tax regulation and tax law. And so that means you have to understand how what you're doing from that bookkeeping level will flow into the tax world, will flow into, which tax form based on this entity type will this end up in, and have enough understanding of those differences.
Yeah.
right? And so the bookkeeping is itself a cycle that then is part of a bigger cycle interacting with taxes. And again, like it's just bigger parts of a whole.
Okay, I understand. It was just the first time that I hear that definition. Even last week, even a few weeks, days when we met, you didn't mention that. So I'm like, okay, that's an interesting concept, and I can understand. Ecosystem, everything is connected. Okay, great. And you did mention a little bit about this, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into. So when you decided to start your business, what were you doing at that point, or where were you in your life that you said, hey, I want to have my own business and I want it to be about this?
Yeah. Yeah. So I do not have an accounting degree. I did not go to college for accounting. My degree is actually in ancient Mediterranean history.
Wow,
Um,
nice.
and I knew when I got that degree that sort of the career options would involve going back into higher education, getting a master's and definitely a PhD. And I took a year off from my undergraduate because I wanted a little break. And then I realized within that year, I don't want to go back into academia. So what am I going to do with my life?
Okay. Something that a lot of us have at one point or another asked ourselves. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so when I thought about it, I realized that what I had really wanted was to be able to go to the Mediterranean, be there, go to the different archaeological sites I had studied. And so I started then thinking, okay, how do I actually make that happen? And I first decided, okay, that means I'm going to start my own business and it needs to be a remote business. This was in 17 when I was sort of going through this process and making these realizations.
Okay.
So, there wasn't a ton of awareness in just like the general populace that you could have a remote business. However, my mother has had some form of remote online business since 1993.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I have seen the full scope of online entrepreneurship basically my whole life.
And basically, I mean, did she create remote? I mean, that's very interesting.
Yeah,
Maybe with time we'll get into that a little bit deeper. But
absolutely.
okay, that's very interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I knew it was possible. She had been encouraging me to have a remote business for a good portion of my life, and I had resisted it until this moment. I was like, okay, my mother is right.
The words that every mother wants to hear. Yeah.
Uh, so I started learning a little bit more about, okay, right now in the online business space, what are people doing? What can I do? And what I quickly realized through speaking with other people who were on the same journey was that no one wanted to handle finances. And here I was like creating spreadsheets to compare and contrast the pros and cons of various invoicing software.
Okay.
And so I was like, I should follow this. And so I knew I didn't want to go back to school again. And so that, limited my options, right? I knew that I couldn't go into, like, I wasn't going to go and get my CPA, right? Because I didn't have the educational requirements. And I was working operations at this time in a registered investment advisor.
Okay.
And so, I was enjoying that, but I also knew, okay, to go down the investment side, I'm going to have to do series, 65, 66. Again, more education. I didn't want to do that big of an investment. And so I, kept poking around and found bookkeeping and, found out that there wasn't any sort of traditional educational requirement to do bookkeeping. And I found Ben Robinson's Bookkeeper Business Launch.
Okay.
It's become a fairly well-known course to teach how to start and run your own remote bookkeeping firm. It's like, this is perfect. And so I did that course where it taught both bookkeeping skills, from, GAAP accounting through all of the various pieces of bookkeeping. And also it had modules on this is how you start a remote business.
Okay.
So it was really great. And so I did that course. And at the same time that I had sort of finished that course, I also picked up and moved to the Mediterranean. And I spent the first 6 months running my business, building my business while I was in the Mediterranean in various different countries.
Nice. Okay. That's great. That's great that you were able to marry both of them, right? Like your passion and also something that you could do remote.
Yeah.
And wow, that's I don't think many people are actually able to do that, at least not in the beginning with their first business. So kudos on that. Definitely that's a great achievement, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, I mean, it's interesting because when I think back to period, the thought that I wouldn't succeed didn't even occur to me, and like maybe that's some naivete, but it worked out, and I think that's partly how I got lucky, how I was able to continue it was just, again, I didn't have thoughts that it wasn't going to work. It was always, okay, what's the next thing that I need to figure out to move forward? And just
Okay.
having that mindset, I think, set me up really, really well. Because you're right, I started at the same time as a bunch of other people that I made friends with, and for the most part, I'm the only one that's still running the business. And so I'm in year 8 now of running Honestly Bookkeeping from the time that I got my very first client.
Awesome. Congratulations on that. And that was actually going to be the next question. You mentioned it right at the end. How did you get your first client? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my very, very first client, I posted a series of like 3 posts on my personal Facebook page saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. If you know of anyone needing bookkeeping support, reach out to me. And someone that I had gone to college with for a couple of years, that we were friendly, but like not super close friends, reached out and was like, hey, since we last talked, I started a business. I need help. And so that was my very first client. And she signed the contract on January 1st, 2018. So
Awesome. Great to start the year.
greatest. It makes all of the like calculations for figuring out years and clients and all of that jazz very, very easy.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. And, just to get a little bit more into, we talked about your story. So we've been a little bit, on the past side of things, but now let's talk a little bit about, the future and specifically some of the stuff that we, conversed about a few days ago. How do you see, AI and everything that's coming about, affecting or changing, your business and the industry, as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll preface this by saying my answer to this question 3 months ago would be entirely different, which I think speaks to the speed at which things are changing around AI. So I think that there's a couple of things around this. Like, firstly, we're not at a point where AI is close to being able to replace human bookkeepers. There's
Okay.
still some pretty like foundational things that are missing from what I see currently offered around like AI bookkeeping, that misses a pretty big part of the bookkeeping process.
Okay.
And again, that gets back to what I was saying previously, in that there's a fundamental misconception around bookkeeping that it's just data entry. And from like a tactical kinesthetic perspective, like, yes, we are putting numbers and putting data into a system, but you have to understand the tax implications of that data and those decisions. And so I don't see any AI software right now that can accurately make those decisions, have that level of discernment on using some of like the metadata around transactions to code things to categories that doesn't really get at the root of the issue. So Amazon is a great example of this because it's one of those merchants that can go a whole bunch of different ways. AI just doesn't have the level of discernment that can do that accurately and understand how that has tax implications, right? So we see Amazon going into COGS accounts for our clients. We see it going into janitorial and cleaning account. We see it going into office supplies. Sometimes it's an asset purchase. And so there's no way for AI to know right now how to accurately do that. Coding a $3,000 Amazon transaction to an asset account when it's actually a COGS expense, that has a very material tax implication. And so AI just doesn't have the sophistication yet to be able to do that discernment and to understand the implications for taxes and, like being able to make management decisions using your bookkeeping and your reports.
Yeah,
So
that's. I'm sorry.
go
No,
ahead.
no. I was gonna say that's so true, right? Like you said, if let's say a $1,000, $2,000 purchase, it could be a new computer, or it could be, I'm just buying paper clips and toner for the rest of the year,
Mhm.
right? And it's a very different way of how you actually put it in the books. It's a very different
Exactly.
purchase. Yeah.
And perhaps that company has a different asset threshold than, the pretty typical 2,500.
Yeah.
How is AI going to know that right now? They can't.
So true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where I see sort of the current lay of the land is like in terms of the client service delivery, we're not there with AI. We're going to have human bookkeepers for a while more. But where I do see it moving into the future, because I do think that AI is going to start being able to get to this level of discernment or get enough that then we're just doing review and like checking, is that it's going to require a switch in the type of thinking required to be a bookkeeper and to do bookkeeping work, right? Because if AI gets to a point where it can do some of this more data entry, transaction level process, the service offering of a bookkeeper and a bookkeeping firm is going to shift into more advisory services. And we've already seen this happening, right? Like the shift from paper and desktop driven bookkeeping towards cloud accounting has already sort of pushed the industry this way, but AI is going to push it even more so that bookkeepers and bookkeeping firms are going to be doing more cash flow analysis, budgeting, advisory, consulting, are going to be more of that sounding board and that strategist for small businesses versus doing the more tactical categorization side of things. And so that means that the people who are going to succeed in bookkeeping are going to be people that can do that strategy thinking, that can think about things from that holistic ecostemic perspective, that can have the relational skills to converse and support the clients in a lot more like thought experiment and getting to know the nuance of that specific business owner and how they think about things to then make recommendations. Whereas, the IRS is very clear about what is a deductible meal and not. That's a much more binary thinking model. Does it fit these parameters? Yes, then it is a business expense. No, not a business expense. And so that's the thing that I think is going to shift both in terms of like how we work and who is working in the industry moving forward with.
Thank you for that. That's a great prediction and actually one that I agree with. And I guess it's like any other thing, like any other tool that has been created in the past, right? It's a tool. It's gonna be like the role of the people that are using it is gonna change, right? The skills are gonna change. You're gonna have to. I mean, it will definitely help, but it's not gonna overtake your job. Just gonna change the way you do your job, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And to that point, what do you think are, and I'd like us to speak a little bit more about this. What do you think are the the mindset shifts, right, that are going to be necessary for the people that are in the industry in order to, start using those tools and progress and evolve with the tools as they're evolving as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, I don't know if this is exclusive to AI, but I think there's a couple of things that I see within bookkeeping, within accounting as like prominent mindset traits. So one of those is there's a strong trend for perfectionistic thinking. Within that is a sense of there is a right answer and a wrong answer, right? That's both binary, if we're talking about math and calculation, 1 + 1 is going to equal 2, unless you get into like super advanced mathematics, but we're not there.
Yeah.
Right. But again, that's a very right and wrong process. It's a really right and wrong thinking, and perfectionism is very right or wrong. I am either, right, I am either perfect in this or I am not. And
Yeah.
so with current bookkeeping and how a lot of that is about what is the process, what are these steps, what's the correct place to put all of this, that lends itself to this binary, this right and wrong perfectionistic mind landscape, for lack of a better word. And so when you then move into more strategic spaces, when you move into more advisory services, there's not a right or wrong answer necessarily. Well, I mean, I've had so many conversations with clients where, client A and client B, if you look at their income statement, pretty similar.
Yeah.
But the types of questions that they ask me, totally different. The things that they're worried about, totally different, right? And so there isn't a right or wrong answer, because what they care about, what they're concerned about, what their goals are, their visions are, how they want to show up in their work, totally different. And so it requires more of that relational, more of that, okay, what are the possibilities?
Yeah.
And then how are we going to narrow those possibilities down based on the conversation with the client? And so that, again, it gets away from that there's a right or wrong answer going on. And so I think that, like, from a mindset perspective for professionals in the space, it's going to be a willingness to be in the gray a little bit more, to be in the nuance, to not go down this right or wrong path as you're working, because every business is just different and there literally isn't going to be a right or wrong answer to provide.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's a very interesting answer, and also very interesting just subject, right? And one that we're gonna see play out over the next few years. Okay, thank you for that. And from everything that we've spoken right now, and we did, talk about this a few days ago, how do you see the seasonality of things, right, changing in terms of taxes, and how AI, is well everything that's happening, right? I don't want to give the answer before you. So what do you think about that? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things all coming together that I think are going to, I'm not 100% certain on this, but I can see it as a very real possibility. So there's several things coming together that could create this future. So one of the things that I'm noticing is, before the pandemic, there were a lot of business owners, a lot of individuals who didn't want an extension. They were like, nope, let's do this by the March 13th, April 15th deadline, and let's get it done. And then there was a smaller subset that were okay with doing the extension. And then with the pandemic, a whole bunch of people were forced into extensions. That was a very chaotic year for the accounting industry. And through that, a bunch of business owners went, I actually kind of like this extension thing. This is kind of nice.
Yeah.
And so what I've seen is that since in the tax season since then, more and more business owners are choosing to do extensions. So that created a little bit of an evening out. And then the second thing that's happening is that there are less and less people coming into the accounting space, right? So there's both fewer and fewer graduates who are going into accounting degrees, and then there's more and more people who are either aging out, retiring. The average age in the accounting industry, years and years ago, I looked at the statistics and it was like 67. More recently, I was seeing things that were around 45. But again, older. We're talking an older population here. So more and more professionals are retiring, and then more and more professionals are burning out. Right? That big four accounting model of working 80 hours per week during tax season. A lot of professionals are going, no, I don't want this. Yeah. Or if I'm going to work this much, I'm going to move to, investment banking, consulting, something where I get paid more for working the same hours. So we have this shrinking pool of professionals in the accounting space. And so if we take that means there's just less options for small business owners. And so because of that, I think there's a strong possibility that more and more bookkeeping and tax firms are going to start having wait lists no matter what, right? Like right now we have a wait list. It tends to get pretty small in the summer because there's still that seasonality, but then it picks back up. And so I think more and more firms are going to move to a waitlist model. Perhaps that will change if AI is able to do onboarding and get that process super, super efficient. But that currently, with more waitlists, that will just naturally create an evening out of the current seasonality of the industry, right? Because we could get to a place where it doesn't matter if a business owner is going, okay, it's January, I need to find someone to do my bookkeeping for the year because I just buried my head in the sand and didn't want to think about it. They're not going to find someone who can do anything in January. And I also think that more and more professionals in the industry are also pushing back against that hyper seasonality of working insane hours from January, March, April. I missed a month in there, February. It's because it's the worst month. I block February out every year.
You're like, yeah, I just I just blacked it out. Yeah.
That more and more professionals are, because they had that experience during COVID of, this is what a little bit more consistent, this is what a little bit more evenly flowed season could look like, even though, again, 2020 was crazy. That there's, I think, less people that are going to be willing to go, you need a cleanup done in 3 days because the deadline to send to the IRS is in 4. Sure, I can do that. I think less and less people are going to be willing to do that. And so it won't matter if businesses are all of a sudden looking more during tax season, that the service professional side is going to go, nope, we gotta wait list. Nope, we don't do rush jobs like that anymore. And so that I think will just naturally create a little bit more flattening out of that tax season. I don't think we'll ever entirely get rid of it unless the US tax landscape entirely changes, anything is
Yeah.
possible at this point. But I think that there's going to be a lot more evening of that process and seasonality.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. And yeah, one of the things, right, that we talked about before was to that point also when you were talking about the pipeline, right, which is a big issue. I think, AI is might help with that as well. But also I think that in terms of, I think right now we are in a sort of like buyer's market still. But I think eventually it'll become, like a seller's market. It's going to be more about who's still there to actually offer services in a professional way,
Yeah.
right? And give a good experience to the client. And so now, and again, it is to your point, like that wait list, right? I think is going to become more and more of a norm as well.
Yeah.
And just to just to finish this part on AI, can you tell the audience? Can you tell us a little bit about how you use AI in your business and also with your clients?
Yeah. Before we get into that, I want to touch on something that you said earlier around like the service professional with
Okay,
the rise of AI,
sure.
because I think we're seeing this already, which is people are craving authenticity right now, especially in like the mid. There was a big push to niche down your business, right? And to like be known for the one thing. And within that, also a push to productize your service, right? Get it down so that instead of being a website designer, you have a 1 week, 5-page website design process that like becomes the product that you market and deliver.
Yeah.
And that within that niching down, I think that we've actually had a siloing of self, that we pushed more towards that productization. And the analogy that I use, and bear with me, is kind of like monoculture, right? Like
Okay.
within agriculture, when you have a monoculture, that's one crop plant that is grown in the same plot of dirt year over year over year. And what we see when that happens is that actually the soil gets stripped of nutrients and you're no longer actually able to cultivate that plot of land anymore. And whereas when you do companion planting, when you rotate, the soil is able to keep sustaining life because you're not planting the same thing, the same nutrients aren't getting stripped out, and you're actually able to have a sustainable piece of land that keeps producing plants and crops. And so I liken that to this like niching down within the business space, because I see it like stripping the humanity out of the person delivering that product service.
Okay.
And we can see that, I think, now people pushing against that, of craving authenticity, of craving like, what's your point of view? Who am I really working with? There's been so many spaces I've been in recently where, it's like a grant writer talking about, okay, when I post about my grant writing or issues with getting, funding in the current landscape, I'm not really getting engagement. But when I post about my morning coffee, I get so much engagement right now. And so I think that that's indicative of this like desire for connection, desire for authenticity. And that I think with the rise of AI, that's going to get even stronger. That people are going to want to know, who's the person that I'm working with? What's their point of view? What's that working relationship really going to look like? Like, can I show up as like a business owner with all that entails, and like have real conversations about what that means with who I'm working with? And so again, I think with AI, that like drive for like connection is going to increase, and that'll be the thing that differentiates firms, right? It's not going to be, we use this specific AI bookkeeper bot to do your bookkeeping. It's, this is how we're going to have conversations with you. this is how we're going to approach our relationship with you. This is what that advisory services is going to look like. Because, yeah, the AI will just be doing whatever the AI does. That's not going to be what becomes material
Yeah.
as a service provider and as within the business landscape about how decisions are made.
Yeah. And, it's so interesting because I think right now with everything, as AI is evolving so much, right? That, like you were saying, even 3 months ago, your answer would have been different. Even 3 months ago, I was still making the joke of, what when we're having a conversation, when you're actually seeing video of someone speaking, that it's true, right? You can see,
Mhm.
you can read a book, you can read an email, whatever it is. It can be AI, and you don't even know, right? Or the chatbots or whatnot, even
Mhm.
if this is a live agent.
Yeah.
But when it's video, it wasn't. And now, 3 months later, with
Mhm.
how AI has evolved and looking at the video. Now, even video, you're not sure if it's AI or not anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I completely agree with you on, the authenticity side of things, because as much as AI can evolve, there still needs to be someone behind them,
Mhm.
right? In terms of that to show an authentic side of it. So I think
Yeah.
it's just better when it's actually you, right? And so we can use AI as a tool, but in the end, it's going to be about the experience that we're giving them, how we're building the relationship with our clients, and also what we're delivering back, in terms of the final product or service. So
Absolutely.
so yeah, I agree with you completely on that. Well, we talked about your journey, we talked about your predictions. So for AI now, one thing I do want to ask, before is, you said that your first client, you got it through a post. It was someone that you knew, and she knew you, even though you were friendly and everything, but not really friends. How has it changed? How has
Mm.
the strategy for growing your business, getting more clients changed from the beginning to now? Like, what's working for you right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So about half of our clients are referrals. And so that's been true for basically the entire history of the business. I took a little bit of a slower growth approach. I wanted something sustainable. And so I really focused on building relationships and making friends with CPAs and, being in various business spaces and just being making connections, right? And so from there, the referrals just really started to flow. And then the other way, and right now this is pretty unique. So one of the other things about our firm is we're Xero-only. So we don't use QuickBooks, we don't use FreshBooks. I have a whole like YouTube videos about that. That's a soapbox in and of itself.
Okay.
But that, sets us apart still, that we're Xero-only. And so we get a lot of people directly through the Xero directory
Oh, wow.
because there, aren't as many firms that are Xero-only. And so I've been able, because I've been on Xero since 2017, basically, I have pretty good SEO in that directory. That's how we've done it historically. We're moving more and more now also to having conversations like this and different podcasts and just starting to talk more about my specific point of view of how I think about bookkeeping and approach services. So again, that's still pretty relational. It's still me showing up as a non-AI person on audio or video and making those connections that way.
Okay, thank you for that. If anybody from Zero is watching, you should sponsor her, definitely, in that case. That's very interesting, where you are married, let's call it, married to a brand, because for whatever reason, right, or married to a software, and you're actually able to reap the rewards from that because no, you are the expert on that, right? And now, for however it works, with their directory, you're reaping the rewards. You're seeing the rewards from being, loyal to that
Yeah.
company. So that's awesome. And now we're getting to the more philosophical side, of the questions of the podcast. So I would love to get your answer on this. What does success look like for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have two answers for this. So the first is a little bit more historical. So I've personally had a lot of medical emergencies within my family over the past couple of years.
Sorry to hear that.
And it's to the point where I've just had to go, all right, team, keep the ship going. And had to step back and do a lot of caretaking and talk to a lot of doctors and visits and all of that horrible jazz. And so I think that that's a huge success that my business is still here. It grew. My team members were able to keep providing services. But, there were hiccups. There were things that, fell through the cracks, but it still worked. And I was still able to show up for my family and be able to take that time to be there. And so I think that's a huge success in and of itself, and sort of one of my ways that I think about already being successful.
Okay.
But from a like ongoing idea of success, the thing that I've really been working on is getting very, very specific, right? Like, I think we all as humans have this disposition to be like, I'll be successful when I have enough money. And then you're like, but what does enough money actually mean?
Yeah.
Like, what, and and some people will be like, well, that means I'm able to go on 2 vacations a year and pay for all my necessities. And you're like, but you do that now and you don't feel successful. So your definition is working against you.
Yeah.
And so I've been really doing a lot of intention around, okay, specifically, what is success? And from a day to day, that's I do 1 or 2 things. If I get those things done, then I feel successful. And that our lived day-to-day experience is our entire experience. And so if I can create that like physical sensation of success by getting that one thing done, those 2 things done, then I am living a successful life consistently. I have that feeling, and it's not then dependent on this like big future fantasy of perfection, of this undefinable, this amorphous success. So instead, I'm thinking about it every day. How do I feel successful? And then I am successful.
I love that. I love that. It's a little bit more, not so much of an end result, but more so of like a continuous state of mind, right? That as long as you're doing the right things, you are being successful. That's a great. That's a yeah. That's a great way of going about things. I think I'm gonna look a little bit more into that and try to be a little bit more like that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for
I
that.
mean, I tried the other way and it wasn't working. So
Okay, awesome. And this is a funny question, so bear with me, but I like asking this a lot to my guests. If you had a magic wand, that you could just wave and solve one thing immediately, about your business, like what would it be?
ooh, great question. I think the first thing that's coming to mind, which did not expect, but here we are,
Awesome.
is sort of harkens back to that last question of, as the owner, about every 6 months, I feel like my role changes.
Okay.
And things are working and going well. I have systems, and then all of a sudden I'm like, things have changed and I can't do what I was doing and it worked, but now it
Yeah.
doesn't. And that keeps surprising me. So I think if I could wave the magic wand, it would be like getting better at that reminder that the business is always going to be changing. It's always going to be moving. And that like baking in more of that mentality into everything we do, into how we work with clients, how we work as a team, how I work as the founder and owner, and then like how that then trickles out into the wider business world. That it is all cyclical, it's all an ecosystem, it all keeps going, and that if we have that perspective, that has a very profound change in our mindsets of not chasing that end goal, not chasing this linear static path, and instead enjoying the process. So yeah.
I love that answer. Love that answer. And final question here. I would love to know, for anyone that's listening to the podcast, whether they're just starting their business or they are thinking about, what advice would you give to them, right, when they're just starting that entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, everything's going to change from what you first think, so just do it. Like, get the first version out of the way, because you will change it. Because whatever you decide at the beginning is not going to be what you end up with. Whether that's your service offering, whether that's your website, whether that's your actual business model, right? Like, it's the only way to know what you do end up wanting is to go through the process of doing it. You don't necessarily have the knowledge before you start or as you're just starting, and you gain that by going through it. And so I got that advice specifically about my business website when I first started, and I can see now how it applies to everything. The first version of my website, I had seen so many people in the online space agonizing over the website, especially because, I tend to be in mostly online business spaces, right? And
Yeah.
so people are like, it's the first thing people are going to see. I have to get it right. And I talked to enough people that were further along in their business where they were like, I spent, thousands of dollars when I first started getting this business. And within the first year, I changed it. And then people who were like, I just slapped something up, within the first year, they changed it. And so I think that's really true about everything, is just you don't know what you don't know, and you're only going to get that by going through it.
I love that. I think that would have been something that when I was first starting, it would have been great to hear, especially because I'm a little bit more in the OCD side of things, right? And so I want everything to be perfect before actually taking this step, right? But it's actually that first step and that second step that get you to closer to, of course, you're never going to get to be perfect, but closer to that version of. Well, Morgan, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. I've loved everything that we've touched upon, especially the predictions for AI and everything that's coming. But before we wrap up, where can our listeners contact you or learn more about you, your company, and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a really great time talking with you, Oscar. This was really fun. Thank you, first of all. So you can find me at honestlybookkeeping.com. If you go to honestlybookkeeping.com/gifts, plural, I have a couple of little freebies there for anyone who's interested.
Awesome.
That's the best way to get in contact with me is my website. And I technically have Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm not really active on those. So my website is the best way to get in contact.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. I'll have the links down below, on the description. Okay, thank you so much, Morgan. Again, this has been a great conversation. I've also had a lot of fun. And that, to anyone watching or listening, if you like this episode, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. It'll help us reach more people. And I hope to see you guys soon. And also hope to speak to you, Morgan, soon as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you.